The Sahel countries of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have signed a landmark deal with Morocco, effectively changing the balance of power in West Africa. The deal involves the construction of a trans-Sahel corridor cutting through the desert, connecting the alliance of Sahel states directly to the Atlantic via the $1.2 billion Dakhla Port. They no longer have to depend on Western-backed ECOWAS neighbors for sea access. In the vast stretch of the Sahel, change no longer whispers, it echoes. Once considered obedient members of the ECOWAS alliance, a regional bloc praised in Western capitals, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have turned the page on a system they now see as complicit in their suffering. It began with discontent. Military coups swept across the region, fueled by rising insecurity, terrorism, and public outrage at governments seen as proxies for foreign interests. ECOWAS responded with sanctions, border closures, and threats. But rather than retreat, the Sahel stood firm. In 2023, the three nations formally withdrew from the ECOWAS, ending decades of political and economic alignment. Together, they formed a new bloc, the Alliance of Sahel States, a confederation rooted in sovereignty, dignity, and mutual defense. Niger's military leader put it this way: "We are not breaking away from Africa. We are breaking away from those who treat us as colonies." To many across the region, it was a breath of fresh air. For the first time in a generation, the Sahel wasn't waiting for permission. It was charting its own course. But independence is never easy, especially for landlocked nations whose economies depend on access to global trade routes. With traditional ports controlled by hostile or unreliable neighbors, the AES needed a new lifeline, a new path to the sea, and Morocco was listening. In a bold diplomatic move, King Mohammed VI extended an invitation. Let us connect the Sahel to the Atlantic. What followed was more than just a port proposal. It was the beginning of a new geopolitical alliance, one that could reshape the future of West Africa forever. This is not just about geography. This is about power, and the battle for who controls Africa's future is just beginning. Infrastructure is never neutral. In Africa, roads and rails are not just pathways. They are power lines deciding who connects, who trades, and who thrives. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, isolation has always been a weapon. As landlocked nations, their dependence on ECOWAS neighbors like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Benin has long been used to pressure and punish them, especially after their departure from the ECOWAS bloc. But Morocco's Atlantic Initiative offered a different equation. Through the upcoming Dakhla Atlantic Port, Morocco pledged not just access, but autonomy. The plan? A vast trans-Saharan trade corridor stretching from the Atlantic Ocean across Western Sahara through southern Morocco and deep into the Sahel. Paved highways, freight rail lines, energy grids, special economic zones, dry ports, logistics hubs designed specifically for AES nations, not ECOWAS. According to Morocco's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the initiative will provide Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso with uninterrupted access to international markets, bypassing routes vulnerable to blockade or political leverage. This is more than just connectivity. It is strategic decoupling. By redrawing the logistics maps of West Africa, the Sahel is shifting its economic gravity away from former colonial ports like Abidjan and Dakar and towards sovereign-controlled corridors designed to serve their own interests. In the word of Burkina Faso's transitional leader, we are not changing governments. We are changing the system that keeps us poor. And the Dakhla corridor is becoming the physical embodiment of that change, the supply line for sovereignty. Because in a region where trade routes have long been tools of domination, building your own is the ultimate act of independence. The Morocco Sahel corridor isn't just a trade route, it's a message. It says the Sahel no longer needs permission. It says alliances built on exploitation, debt, and double standards are being replaced. It says Africa is tired of being managed and ready to lead. By partnering with Morocco, a nation that has historically played both African and Arab diplomatic cards, the Sahel states are doing more than just building roads. They are realigning power on the continent. For decades, the economic address of West Africa flowed through former colonial ports controlled by nations aligned with France, the EU, and the IMF. This allowed Western-backed elites to dictate terms, control customs, and wield influence over their landlocked neighbors. But now, through the North-South corridor independent of ECOWAS, the Sahel is asserting a new kind of sovereignty, one rooted in infrastructure, not ideology. And Morocco has its own motives, of course. By anchoring the Sahel Strait to the Atlantic coast, the Rabat expanded its sphere of influence, strengthening its claims over the Western Sahara through development and deepens its role as a continental power broker. The West has noticed, and so have Morocco's traditional rivals. France sidelined, Algeria wary, the EU consigned, the United States largely silent but watching. A quiet shift is underway, and the map of West African power is being redrawn without Western hands holding the pen. As AES consolidates military and Morocco connects them economically, the lines between diplomacy, trade, and resistance are blurring. This is not just cooperation, it's geopolitical defiance engineered in concrete rails and sea lanes. And with every kilometer of that corridor laid across the desert, the message becomes louder. Africa is no longer interested in being managed. It is ready to chart its own future on its own terms. When ECOWAS was formed in 1975, it promised economic integration, political stability, and regional unity. According to a 2024 report by African Center for Strategic Studies, ECOWAS approval ratings in the Sahel countries dropped below 20% after the sanctions, with most citizens viewing the bloc as an enforcer of foreign interests rather than a protector of African unity. But nearly 50 years later, its reputation is in tatters, and the Sahel breakaway has turned a slow decline to a full-blown crisis of legitimacy. The withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger in 2023 was more than just a diplomatic setback. It was a vote of no confidence, not just in the bloc's leadership, but in the entire post-colonial architecture of regional governance. And what triggered the exit wasn't ideology, it was injustice. ECOWAS responded to the Sahel coups with harsh economic sanctions, border closures, and threats of military interventions, tools rarely used against member states with equally shaky democratic records but strong Western backing. Critics across Africa ask, where was this courage when constitutional term limits were being scrapped? Where was the urgency when elected leaders used foreign troops to suppress protests? The hypocrisy was laid bare. And while ECOWAS tried to isolate the Sahel, it only pushed them deeper into each other's arms and now into Morocco's Atlantic embrace. The Moroccan AES corridor has now given these states what ECOWAS denied them: access, opportunity, and dignity. And more dangerously for the status quo, it has set a precedent. If the Sahel can walk away from ECOWAS, build its own trade routes, and thrive without Western approval, what's stopping others? This is the fear echoing in the halls of Abuja, Accra, and Abidjan. Because once the illusion of necessity breaks, so does the system built to contain Africans' ambition. In the streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, the Morocco Sahel corridor is more than just a trade deal. It's a symbol of freedom, of movement without restriction, of a continent finally standing tall. The vision of a highway stretching from the dunes of the Atlantic to the heart of Sahel has awakened something that sanctions and coups could not silence: popular belief in African self-determination. You see it in the rallies, crowds waving AES flags, chants against imperialism, graffiti calling for unity, not under foreign guided ECOWAS, but under African led cooperation. What once felt like political rhetoric is becoming a popular movement. Across West Africa, young people, long disillusioned by elite led integration that only enriched the few, are beginning to imagine new possibilities. One where ports are not gate kept. One where borders don't divide but connect. One where infrastructure doesn't serve foreign corporations but Africa's future. The Morocco Sahel corridor has sparked an ideological shift. A growing number of citizens now see regional liberation as achievable, not through elections alone, but through infrastructure, trade sovereignty, and bold diplomacy. Pan-Africanism is no longer just the language of liberation era icons. It's being reborn in TikTok, podcasts, community meetings, and protest songs. In the words of a young activist in Burkina Faso, we are not just watching history, we are building it, road by road, border by border. And what's perhaps most threatening to the old order, the movement is contagious. From Guinea to Togo, from Chad to Central Africa, citizens are questioning the utility of belonging to institutions that deliver foreign interests more than African outcomes. What began as a trade deal has become a touch, and across the continent, the fire is spreading. To the Sahel nations, Morocco extended a hand, but make no mistake, it was also making a move. Beneath the warm rhetoric of unity and integration lies a highly strategic play, one that could reshape not only West Africa's trade map, but Morocco's regional identity and global positioning. At the heart of Morocco's Atlantic initiative is the $1.2 billion Dakhla Port, currently under construction in Western Sahara, a disputed territory claimed by both Morocco and the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. By anchoring a continent-wide trade corridor in Dakhla, Morocco isn't just promoting development, it's cementing its claim over the Western Sahara through investment, international partnerships, and economic integration. As Rabat see it, roads and ports speak louder than resolutions. And with Sahel nations now aligning their trade routes with Moroccan infrastructure, the symbolic impact is enormous. The AES, defiant, anti-imperial, pan-African, is validating Morocco's vision of sovereignty by development. This alliance also elevates Morocco's as a continental connector, building North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, Arab and Francophone blocs, Atlantic and Sahel. For a kingdom often excluded from regional bodies like the African Union's Peace and Security Council or sidelined in ECOWAS diplomacy, this is a diplomatic breakthrough wrapped in concrete and asphalt. And the gains are not just symbolic. If successful, Morocco secures preferential trade access to a new bloc of mineral-rich nations, a boost to its soft power across Francophone Africa, and a strategic counter to Algerian influence in the region. Algeria, which backs Western Sahara's independence and maintains cold relations with Rabat, views the Morocco-Sahel corridor as a threat, both to its regional clout and to the Polisario Front diplomatic traction. In short, while the Sahel sees sovereignty, Morocco sees leverage. This is the brilliance and the tension of the Atlantic Initiative. It's Pan-Africanism with geopolitical return on investment. Trade is power, and for the first time in decades, the Sahel is gaining control over both. The Morocco-Sahel corridor is not just a geopolitical bypass, it's an economic artery, one that could transform three of Africa's most isolated nations into regional exporters, manufacturing hubs, and critical suppliers of world's most sought-after resources. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are rich in gold, uranium, lithium, phosphate, and manganese. But for years, the path from mine to market was dominated by middlemen, foreign corporations, Western financiers, and ECOWAS ports that tax their future in the name of regional integration. That's changing. By connecting directly to the Atlantic through Morocco's Dakhla Port, the AES nations are cutting out logistical bottlenecks and political choke points. They are forging new trade routes to Europe, Latin America, and emerging Asian markets, and doing so on their own terms. According to a 2024 policy brief by the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, the corridor could reduce export times for Sahel minerals by up to 40%, while slashing dependency on Ivorian and Senegalese ports by over 60%. But the real price lies not just in exports, but in value addition. With Morocco investing in dry ports, industrial zones, and logistic centers along the corridor, the Sahel has an opportunity to refine its minerals, assemble its goods, and process its crops, turning raw wealth into retained wealth. And with Pan African financial institutions now looking to fund these industrial nodes, a silent revolution is brewing. Africa, for once, is producing for itself. It's still early. There are risks, of course. Corruption, insecurity, and sabotage linger. But the economic logic is undeniable. If you control your routes, you control your value. And if you control your value, you change your destiny. The Morocco Sahel corridor is doing more than moving goods. It's moving the balance of wealth away from extractive foreign interest and towards African hands. At first, the Morocco Sahel corridor was dismissed by global observers as a symbolic gesture, another ambitious African infrastructure dream unlikely to take shape. But now, the deal signed, construction underway, and alliances shifting, the world is no longer watching with skepticism. It's watching with concern because this isn't just about roads and ports. It's about realignment, a fundamental repositioning of Africa's geopolitical and economic center of gravity. France, once the dominant power in West Africa, has watched its influence collapse across the Sahel. Military bases expelled, diplomatic ties severed. And now, the Morocco backed corridor offering the Sahel nations a trade route independent of French allied ECOWAS ports. The last threads of leverage are fraying. The European Union, heavily invested in ECOWAS as a bulwark of regional stability, sees the AES corridor as a disruptive force, one that undermines their trade preferences, migration controls, and access to raw materials. The United States, though quieter in public, is reportedly reviewing its Sahel strategy. According to leaked diplomatic cables referenced by Foreign Policy magazine in February 2024, US officials expressed concern that the corridor could cement anti-Western sentiment and weaken Western ally regional institutions. China, meanwhile, sees opportunity. Beijing has long invested in infrastructure diplomacy across Africa, but the Morocco Sahel Alliance opens a new Atlantic gateway that bypasses US influence ports and offers fresh leverage for Chinese African trade. Reports from the China Development Bank confirm preliminary talks to finance industrial zones along the corridor, signaling Beijing's interest in backing the AES not just politically but financially. And Russia, already deepening military ties with the Sahel, is exploring maritime partnership to gain a presence along the corridor, potentially giving Moscow its first Atlantic foothold in West Africa. The geopolitical chessboard is shifting. What began as a regional exit from ECOWAS is now a continental tremor, one that's drawing the attention of every major power in a shake in Africa's future. But for Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, this isn't just about picking sides. It's about ending dependency and proving to the world that Africa can forge its own path without asking anyone for permission. The Morocco Sahel corridor is not just a project. It's part of a continental awakening, a growing realization that infrastructure is independence and that Africa's liberation in the 21st century will not be declared, it will be built. From East Africa's Lamu Port to Central Africa's Enga Dam, from Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam to African Continental Free Trade Area, a new doctrine is taking root across the continent. Whoever owns the roads, the rails, and the ports owns the future. For far too long, Africa's physical map was drawn by extractive interest. Colonial railways ran from mines to harbors. Roads bypassed villages to serve plantations. Ports were gateways not for African trade but for African plunder. That blueprint still lingers in the broken logistic chains, the stunted manufacturing bases, and the endless exports of raw materials. But now, from Niamey to Nairobi, from Dhaka to Durban, African nations are beginning to connect, not outward, but inward. The Morocco Sahel corridor is one of the most symbolic expressions of that shift. It bypasses old choke points. It reimagines sovereignty not as a slogan, but as a supply chain. And it proves something powerful. Africa doesn't need to dismantle the global order to thrive. It just needs to stop waiting for others to build for it. According to the African Union Infrastructure Consortium, over $170 billion in African-led infrastructure projects are now under development, the majority of which are aimed at inter-African trade rather than export extraction. This is a quiet revolution in steel, in concrete, and in fiber optic cables. And it's not just about the state. Grassroots cooperatives, Pan-African fintechs, and local engineering firms are joining the movement because across Africa, the belief is spreading. If the borders were drawn to divide us, then the roads must be built to reunite us. After centuries of conquest, colonization, and coerced partnerships, Africa stands once again at a crossroad. But this time, it is laying the road itself. The Morocco Sahel corridor isn't just a stretch of asphalt across the desert. It is a declaration from landlocked nations who were once locked out of prosperity, now carving their own passage to the sea. It's a message to former colonial powers, to financial overlords, to institutions built without Africa's consent. The age of obedience is over. From the dust of discontent rose a new alliance, the alliance of Sahel states, born not in luxury conference halls, but in defiance of abandonment and forged through shared struggle. From isolation came innovation, from sanctions came sovereignty, from exclusion came imagination of a continent unshackled from dependency, and from Morocco came an opportunity, not as a savior, but as a partner willing to build, to connect, and to dream beyond borders. This isn't the end of ECOWAS, but it is the end of an illusion that African unity must come pre-approved by foreign capitals, that trade must trickle down through old ports and old hierarchies, that landlocked means powerless. Not anymore. With every kilometer of highway, every rail laid, every container offloaded in Dakhla, the Sahel is proving a point, not just to West Africa, but to the world. Africa's future will not be outsourced. It will be engineered by Africans for Africans. And as this desert road stretches to the Atlantic, so too does a new era stretch across the continent, bold, unyielding, and unstoppable. This is Frontline Africa. If you love content like this, subscribe, like, and drop your comments. I am Ezekiel Enejeta. See you in the next one.